refresh the Apka Chef Online page. Anyone? Yeah, anyone? Yeah, anyone enter yet? One person. Okay. 2 person. Good. So I'm on the Apka Chef Online subscribers page right now. So how can I go into the video and also see as well? Because he's doing live. I'm just looking for. No, so I can watch the question. I want to watch the video also. So when I see somebody type some kind of. Oh, you'll tell me? Oh, okay. Then. Okay, Chef. Thank you very much. We'll just wait another 2 minutes or so. Hello, everyone who's joined so far. So we're just going to wait about another 2 minutes or so, and we'll see how many people are going to join, and then we'll get started. So I'll be hearing and seeing your questions you're asking, as well as if I have some kind of questions. You see that I've been on the group trying to answer as many of your questions as possible. So some of the questions that I've seen, I'll be able to answer as well that I've seen people have been posting. So just give us 1-2 minutes. So you just let some people join in who are maybe trying to find the video, and then we'll get started. Also, I'm trying to find the video. Anyone asking anything? Say anything so far, Mervin? I'm still trying to figure out how I can watch. I really bad at the technology thing. Here you go. Now I found it. Good. So let's go ahead. We're going to mute, and we're going to watch full screen. You may still have to ask me some questions because I'm having a little bit of issue my internet here, getting the questions to pop up. Okay, now I can see myself. Oh, okay. Yeah, I see you guys now. My internet's a little bit slow on my laptop, or I'm reading your questions. So also one of our front desk team is going to be helping our student affairs. Hello, everyone. Hello, Rachel, Asmi, and Smita. I'm sorry if I'm saying that correctly. And sorry, I see myself playing my phone a second. I'm trying to also log into here as well. I'm not the most tech-savvy person. So, I'm delayed on my computer. So I'm here. You guys can ask your questions that you may have. If you didn't see, we also just recently posted a bread theory video for all the breads. So one thing, if you watch this video, all of the breads that we'll be doing is going to have the same process and same theory. So if you understand that these few things that I talk about in this video, you'll be able to apply them to all of the breads. And I'm sure in the future we'll be getting this uploaded on the website, but for now you can see it on our Apka Chef Online subscribers. We have a full 45-minute video talking about everything from the ingredients that we're using to the type of tools that we have, to how to fold the bread, how to check the doneness after the bulk fermentation, how to check if it's ready after the final fermentation, a slow video of scoring, because when we score the bread, the videos, we have to get them in the oven pretty fast. And also in this video, I talk about how to put some steam inside your home oven and the different type of ovens that we're using. So now's a good time. Anyone write any questions yet? Okay. How many people are in the group? From here, I see 5, 6, 7. Okay. No, no question. Okay, so if no one has any specific questions at the moment, maybe I can go over a few things that I saw very common questions when I was answering on the Apka Chef Online subscribers page. So one of the most common things that I see is about the flour. Now, one thing I would like to say to you guys is flour is very different from country to country, brand to brand. But one thing you're going to want to look for when you're shopping is maybe the label says bread flour or high protein flour. Now, when we're making bread, we want to use a flour that's going to be between 11.5 to 13% protein. When I discuss the protein in the bread, basically it's talking about two proteins called glutenin and gliadin that when we mix the dough, they're going to form to make the gluten strength of our dough. So one way you can tell the protein of your flour, if your bag doesn't say, is, like I said, look for the high protein flour or bread flour. But also when I go to different countries, I travel a lot. I go to India quite often. Also Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore. I've been to the Middle East for classes. And I always get new types of flour. Now, sometimes the bags, they won't always tell you the protein content. So normally what I'll do is if I can't find out the protein for the flour from directly looking at the bag, I go to the company website, and then they'll usually have a spec sheet on there. Spec sheet saying the products, this flour, they'll give you the protein content. And if not, I've always found that the companies are pretty helpful if you email them as well and ask. I like to go around Malaysia to the grocery stores, and I buy a lot of different bags of flour. They say bread flour or high protein. And I'll email the companies and I'll ask them, hey, how much protein content inside your flour? Because I'm always liking to test new flours. Now, besides bread flour, we have other types of flour that we use inside the pastry and baking. We have all-purpose flour. Now, between bread and all-purpose flour is going to have a bit of a lower percent protein. The protein for all-purpose is generally between 9 to 11%. In most cases, this type of flour will be suitable for making bread as well. So if you use an all-purpose flour, you can make most of our breads, but you may find that the texture on the inside is a little bit more softer and spongy than as opposed to getting a bit more of a open crumb on the bread. This all-purpose flour is generally really good for baguettes because one other thing about the gluten in the flour is besides being able to hold the shape of the dough and allowing the bread to trap the carbon dioxide from the yeast and rise, it also makes the dough a little bit more elastic. So actually for baguettes, we like to use some all-purpose flour sometimes as well if we find the bread flour very strong. Why? Because the baguette's something that needs to be stretched out long. So a weaker flour like an all-purpose, we can even use for baguettes because it helps for the shaping. As well as croissant and viennoiserie, we can also use all-purpose flour as well. But what you don't want to use for the bread making will be cake or pastry flour. These flours generally have a much lower protein content, between 6 to 9%. This is going to be too low to make bread. If you have too low of a protein content, the dough will not be able to trap enough carbon dioxide being released by the yeast, and your bread's not going to be able to rise. So, I mean, this is really the basic thing that we need to know about the flour. They all come from wheat, and what actually makes the protein content different in many different types of flour is there's 3 factors. One is the type of wheat, whether it's a hard or soft wheat, or a red wheat or a white wheat, and also the season it's grown in. This is why you can find so many variations from flour to flour. Even one company that says bread flour may have a lower or higher protein content than a different company that says bread flour because they're using a different type of wheat and it's grown during a different growing season. So this is one thing that you should look for. So normally any type of bag that says bread flour or high protein flour should be good for you guys to use for bread. Now I see a lot of comments saying that you guys, we have a lot of subscribers in India saying they can't find bread flour. I've been to India many times to teach classes. I know you guys can find bread flour there, but you may have to source it from some different places or from a different grocery store. But I know also sometimes you may be able to also buy vital wheat gluten. It's a powdered form that's going to have some gluten protein inside. So if you're choosing to add some vital wheat gluten to your flour, you can add about 1% of the flour weight. Meaning if you find your flour doesn't have enough protein, it's not strong enough to give a good rise in the bread, you can have the vital wheat gluten powder add 1% of this to the flour weight. So if I have 1,000 grams of flour, I can add 10 grams of the vital wheat gluten to start, and it's going to help give a little bit of extra strength. Okay, good question. We have, how do we store the bread flour? Should it be kept inside the fridge? Okay, if you're buying in a large amount, there's two things that we need to look for the flour. One, we want to keep it away from moisture and humidity. One, because flour, it actually has a little bit of oils inside, because the actual wheat has some natural oils, so these will go bad fast. So generally bread flour can be kept at room temperature for a month. 2 months is no problem. But if you find that you're in a very humid environment, you're going to want to keep it airtight, and at room temperature is okay. If you want to keep it longer than that, you can actually keep inside the freezer, will be fine for you. Okay, no other questions? Let's see. So I hope, Rachel, I hope that answers your question for this one. Room temperature, airtight is fine. You want to try not to get so much humidity inside, because besides having the fats go bad inside of the flour, when your flour is very humid, it actually starts absorbing moisture from the air. So you may find it actually can't take as much water later on. One thing I would like to tell you guys about bread making is it's really a science. You only have so little ingredients. The basic ingredients for bread is flour, water, salt, and yeast. So it's very temperamental because yeast is a living thing. So I can tell you the learning curve for bread is very, very steep. Even if I tell you guys to proof this dough exactly at this time for 2.5 hours, every single step of the process is really going to affect the final output. In our theory video, actually, I go through all these steps from scaling the ingredients all the way to the final baking and cooling. Each one of these steps have a certain point to the bread. So one thing I suggest for you guys is just to make bread. Don't be scared. You're going to find that you're going to make some mistakes as it goes along, and you're going to see one day you may see the bread going a little bit fast or going a little bit slow, or you have this result. The best thing for you to do is you just test and try to keep an eye. I have a notebook. If I had here, I show you guys with flour tests from hundreds and hundreds of different types of flour. So actually, I get new flour, I test, I write the kind of result, and I can see what kind of different flour is going to affect for me. Bread is always a learning process because the yeast is a living thing. So I saw one question actually before on the Facebook Live. They want to know a little bit more how yeast works. So when we're talking about commercial yeast, which is our instant yeast and our fresh yeast, we have a bacteria. It's actually not bacteria, it's actually a fungus family called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So what this does is this organism, it actually breaks down simple sugars provided by the flour, because the flour is starch, it's sugar. It's going to break down these sugars, and it's going to give off carbon dioxide and alcohol. Alcohol is a byproduct by all fermentation, and it's going to bake off during the baking, but it's also going to give a little bit of flavor. Now, carbon dioxide is what makes the bread rise. Now, in a warmer environment, it's going to eat the sugar faster and proof faster. So if you happen to be in an environment that's very warm and humid, you're going to find that your bread may proof faster, and you're going to have to adjust. In the theory video, I show you guys how to look at a bread and touch and see if it's ready by doing a poke test. So you guys can use this, and you guys can be able to adjust. If your dough temperature or your room temperature is very cold, you'll also find it goes a little bit slower as well. So you may need to give the bread a little bit more time. These are all things that you're going to have to adjust and kind of play with your own specific situation. When I go to another country that I've been to for the first time and I get a new type of flour, always I'm going to test the dough. I'm going to make one and I'm going to see the rise, and I'm going to watch it go and fall. So I'm going to see how it's going to adjust according to that specific flour and also that specific environment that we're having. Now, the more that you guys bake bread, you will be able to get this kind of feel for yourself. There's a few books that I can recommend for you guys. I actually wrote in one of the comments, somebody actually asked me for some book recommendations. I suggest you read. You can understand also a lot more about these intricacies for the different science and the proofing for the yeast and the bacteria as well. So bread really requires a lot of trial and error and a lot of hand feel. When we're making pastries, most of the pastry, if we just follow the recipe exactly and we do the same mold and the same kind of color, we can get the same product very easy. But for the bread, because it's a living organism, it requires a lot of learning curve, a lot of practice, a lot of touching, a lot of feeling. But I promise you guys that if you make the bread, you'll be able to get to understand this. It took me very many years to learn how to get the bread just nice. I would say I've been baking bread for close to 14 years. So the first 5, I don't want to discourage, but the first 3 to 4 years, I have to say that it was a lot of learning and learning and learning. But the more bread that I make, the more I said, oh, okay, this one happened. Maybe next time I prove a little bit more, a little bit less. And I really got to understand how the bacteria works and how the yeast functions. Any questions, Mervyn? Guys, don't be shy to ask any question. This is a Q&A for you. So you have a question, I give you an answer. I want to make sure that your specific questions are also answered. So I see a lot of people talk about the different types of flour: bread flour, all-purpose flour, yeast. Yes, you have a question? No? How many people are logged on now? Still only 9. Okay. Let's see, what else? 4 comments. Okay, so another question that I see, which actually I explained in the theory video as well, but I'll answer for you now. So since we're having a session, is about baking in a home oven. Now, in the commercial, we use a deck oven or sometimes a fan oven, a convection oven, for baking a lot of our breads. But I mentioned to do steam. So in our theory video, I show you how to make some steam at home, but also I can explain to you now some different ways. Now, the purpose of the steam when we're actually baking the bread is to make sure the crust doesn't form too fast. So what happens when we put the bread inside the oven? Here's our loaf of bread. Sorry, my crude image. We put it inside, and when the bread gets the heat, what happens is the yeast starts producing carbon dioxide at an accelerated rate. So the yeast, because it starts becoming warm, it starts producing a lot of carbon dioxide, and the bread begins to rise. So as it's rising is where we get a lot of the volume. What the steam is going to do is going to create moisture on the crust of the bread to make sure. Rachel, I'll get to this one when I finish this one. It's a good question. So the steam, what it does is it creates moisture on the crust, so the crust doesn't form too fast. So this way, as the yeast is producing carbon dioxide from what we call the oven spring, it's going to rise more before the crust sets. Another thing the steam is going to do is it's going to help melt some of the sugars on the crust of the bread, the dextrose that's inside the flour, and it's going to allow it to get a nice color on the bread. So what you'll find is if you're baking a bread without steam, maybe the volume is going to be a bit less because the crust forms very early. And then also the bread may be a little bit more dense on the inside because it doesn't oven spring as much. And the color may be a little bit dull. Okay. Okay. Also, to make some steam in your home oven, in the theory video I show you guys, we can take a pot of hot water, boil the water first, and put it in the oven during the steam portion of the baking. When I say that we're going to let the steam out, we just take out the pot to let the crust dry. Another way would be to take maybe a baking pan, like a loaf pan. You put some lava rocks inside, something that's non-chemically treated, some small rocks, or even some clean like nuts and bolts inside. Put it in the oven to heat up. It'll be very hot. When you're ready to bake, you can actually pour some water on, and like a sauna, it's going to create steam inside your oven. Another way is you see, if you watch some place online, they'll open the oven and spray a lot of water inside. This is one way to get the steam, but the unfortunate fact is when you have this big oven door open and you spray steam in, a lot of it's going to come directly out. It helps a little bit, but maybe can only, along with the pot or along with the steam you're creating in the loaf pan, can give a better result. But just by spraying and closing the door, most of the time a lot of the steam is going to escape while the door is open. Another way that you'll see very common is baking inside of a Dutch oven, a large cast iron pot with a heavy lid. So in order to do it this way, this is actually recommended in the Tartine book by Chad Robertson. It's a very nice method, But the only problem is it limits us to use round loaves. I can't put a baguette in a Dutch oven. So to create the steam this way, it's very simple. We have the bottom part of the Dutch oven and the top part inside the oven during the preheating. When it comes time to bake the bread, I'll have the bread on a piece of parchment paper. I cut the parchment paper around, I cut the bread, and I'll put it in the Dutch oven and cover. The bread itself is naturally going to release moisture. So the lid of a Dutch oven is very heavy, so it's going to keep the moisture inside. So if you're using this method, then when you're during the steam part of the baking, you just leave the lid on. When I say in the video to let the steam out, you just remove the lid. So these are 3 most common ways that we can have of making steam inside your oven. Okay, Rachel, I'll come with your first question. The most difficult bread that I ever baked in the past, I'm honestly going to tell you, is probably baguette. Because baguette itself it's a quintessential bread. It's flour, water, salt, and yeast. There's nothing else you can get for the flavor inside the baguette besides playing with these ingredients very nice. Also, the scoring and the perfect shaping of the baguette, something that requires a lot of practice. So something so simple like a baguette really took me a lot of years to be able to get very confident into the fact that I don't have to think about anymore. When I go ahead and I bake, I can bake. So that was probably the most difficult bread for me because people look at it, they know what a baguette looks like. And to get a really nice flavor out of such simple ingredients and get a nice opening and get a nice shape, that was quite difficult. If we have to make a larger quantity of bread, can we simply double the recipe? Yeah, of course. You can double, triple, times 100 the recipe if you have a big enough mixer. Which will bring me to the next portion of the mixer. I get a lot of questions about hand mixing. You can do these breads by hand as well. It's no problem. You know, just simply do a kneading of the bread until you get a smooth dough. It's going to be the same as we do in the mixer. You can get the same result, but it's going to take a little bit more force and a much longer time than we do in the mixer. But in the theory video, I show you how to check for the gluten window. You just knead the dough until you can get this kind of window, and you'll be able to get the same result by hand kneading as well. Okay. Now, next question. So now we're getting questions. This is nice. Thank you, guys. Where do we spray the water? So if you're having an oven that's electric, do not spray on the electric. So normally what you can do, put the water on a mist setting. You can spray the surface of the dough a little bit. But I warn you, don't spray the bread itself so much. Because let's say we cut the bread. If you spray a lot of water, actually this water may seal the dough back together. So you can spray a little bit on the crust of the bread, but not too much. And then just spray around the sides a little bit. Get a good amount of steam and then close your oven. In my experience, what's the best technique for getting a sourdough bread with good chocolate flavor? I tried replacing the water. Okay. You won't be able to just replace water with chocolate milk like this. Because the reason why is milk has a lot of fat. The fat doesn't hydrate the proteins the same way water does. Those proteins inside of the flour, they need water to hydrate. So anytime that we replace water with something else, we're adding something else as well. If I'm replacing it with milk, milk is only a certain percentage of water content, and the rest is fat and sugar. If I'm replacing with a juice, I'm adding a lot of sugar. So if I take a water out and I replace with, for example, an apple juice, I have water content inside, which help the hydration, but I'm adding a lot of sugar. It's going to prove very, very fast. To get a good chocolate flavor in the dough, you can try replacing about 5% of your flour with cocoa powder. This is normally what we do. And then if cocoa powder, because it doesn't have a very strong chocolate flavor, you can actually take some couverture chocolate, and like I show you guys in the video how to add nuts and fruits into the bread, you can gently fold in some couverture chocolate at the end of mixing. Okay. Any other questions as well? So far we're getting more questions. They're quite good. Can I use all-purpose flour instead of using pastry flour for croissants? Yes, you can. Now the reason why we have some pastry flour and bread flour in the croissants is because we laminate the dough, so we actually don't want the croissant dough to be too strong, or else it's very hard after all the lamination, the dough shrinks a lot. So if we use all bread flour for a croissant, we may find that when we cut the dough or roll it, it shrinks a lot more. So by replacing some of the bread flour with an all-purpose flour or pastry flour, it just helps cut the protein, making the rolling a little bit easier. I could make a croissant with all bread flour as well, but it's just going to shrink a lot more. So if you want to replace the pastry flour with all-purpose flour, you also can. But you want to use some bread flour because you do need the strength for rising. Storage and shelf life for bread, 1 day. I don't use any preservatives in our bread. Bread is meant to be baked and eaten at the same day. You can store it inside the freezer, but actually this is what happens when you bake the bread is we call starch degradation. So actually during the baking, the starches absorb a lot of water and they swell up. When the bread, the second it comes out of the oven, it starts to cool down, and what happens is the starches that were swollen up before with water start to release water from cooling, and then they collapse. This is why bread that gets stale, because the starches start to lose water over time, and they begin to kind of become more dense. So your bread becomes more crumbly and also more kind of dense and chewy when you leave the bread for a long period of time. There's nothing we can do about this if we don't start adding like monoglycerides and other preservatives inside the flour that's going to hold the moisture inside. So ideally, from my honest point of view, bread should be baked and eaten the same day or the next day. It's not something that we store for a long period of time for a selling point. Now for me, I eat bread, I know it's going to get stale after a day. You can't help this. Especially in a humid country, you're going to lose the crust. But if you do want to keep your bread for personal use and for a longer period of time, the best thing is to let it cool down at room temperature until it's completely cooled down, wrap it and store in the freezer. You don't want to store inside the refrigerator because you'll also lose moisture in the refrigerator. What happens in the freezer is the water actually freezes into the bread. So when you take it out of the freezer, you reheat it, you don't lose as much water in the freezer. So cool down, wrap, and store in the freezer is the best way to store your bread if you want to keep it for a longer time. For selling, you should bake bread fresh every single day for your customer. Is there a different hand technique for the whole wheat flour since it's different from all-purpose flours? No, it's the same. Whole wheat flour and all-purpose flour, they both come from wheat. Whole wheat just means we're using the whole grain. Bread flour, all-purpose flour, cake flour, pastry flour, they're only using a small portion of the grain, which is the white starchy part called the endosperm. So all are made from wheat. So the mixing technique will be the same. Now, one thing that may help you if you're using a high portion of whole wheat inside your recipe is you can actually take the flour and the water and mix it ahead of time and let it sit for an hour just by itself. We call this autolyse. Because sometimes the particles inside whole wheat flour are a bit larger, they take a little bit longer time to absorb water. So if you're using maybe about 40% or more of whole wheat, take the water and the flour, mix it by hand very roughly. Don't need any gluten, just mix it, cover it, and let it sit for an hour first. It'll help absorb the water because whole wheat flour generally takes a little bit more time to absorb the water than bread flour, all-purpose flour, pastry flour, or cake flour does. But they all come from the same plant. They're all wheat flour. Okay. All these are really good questions. I don't want you guys to be shy. I've been teaching for a long time, so I'm very happy to answer you guys. I very love making bread and I love teaching, and I'm very passionate about the science of bread baking specifically. So there's nothing you guys ask me that I can't answer. I won't think is silly. So please just go ahead, ask any kind of question that you guys want. And meanwhile, I think of some other questions that we may have. I see about we talked about the oven steam. We talked about how the yeast works. Okay, how do you control the thickness of the crust? Does a different flour type give different crust texture? Okay, so I start first with Wilfred's question. How do you control the thickness of the crust? This is all about baking. Now, the thickness of the crust is going to be affected, yes, by the protein content of the flour. So the higher protein, you may have a bit of a thicker crust, but the crust really has a lot to do with baking. Now, like I said, when we have steam in the oven, it keeps the crust from forming. So everything bakes from the outside in first. So one thing is having a good amount of steam in the initial part of the baking will help keep the crust from forming right away, and you'll get a thinner crust overall. This is another purpose of the steam. The longer that you bake, the crust starts getting thicker and thicker and thicker. This goes for any pastry product, whether it's choux pastry or bread or banana bread, anything like this one. So you want to bake at a high temperature for a shorter period of time to get a nice rise and a thinner crust, and you want some steam. Now, if you're using sourdough, sourdough will generally give you a thicker and chewier crust because a high amount of acid inside that actually strengthen the gluten protein content. Okay, now we're getting questions. This is good. Hold on, let me just scroll up a little bit. Why does my bread crust wrinkle? I'm using enriched dough, 180 for 13 minutes. It's going to happen. These breads are soft, so they're not going to have the same stability as if I baked a baguette. A baguette or a bread that doesn't have enriched dough inside, or like fats inside, it's going to form a hard crust and it forms a shell. The breads that we tend to bake a bit softer, after they cool down just by the natural reaction to them, they're going to tend to wrinkle a little bit. If you don't want them to wrinkle, you can try baking the bread a little bit longer, forming a bit of a thicker crust, but at the same time, you'll get a bit of a thicker crust as well, this way. Oh, hey, Meryl, you asked me. Hi, Meryl. I remember you. So yes, it's gonna wrinkle regardless, just because the natural thin and soft crust of these breads. You can bake a little bit longer, get a more thicker crust, but also know you'll have a bit of a thicker crust on that bread. Try baking, if you want, 180 for the 13 minutes or 10 minutes, and then drop the heat to like 165 for a little bit so you don't get too much color, but you can bake slightly longer. This may help you. Is it possible to bake bread with wheat flour? Yes, all of our flour is wheat flour. Diana or Diana, can you please specify, do you mean whole wheat flour or just wheat flour in general? Because all the flour that we're using, whole wheat, all-purpose bread flour, it's all technically wheat flour. It all comes from wheat. So if you mean whole wheat flour or something, you can specify this one. But from what I understand, yes, all the flour we're using is wheat flour. Now, rye, spelt, einkorn, all these flours are different, but all these bread, all-purpose, pastry flour, cake flour, and whole wheat flour, they're all from wheat. Can the bread dough be left overnight in the chiller? From there, how should we proceed with the baking of the bread? Yes, we can leave inside the chiller, but you need to be careful. If we're going to leave the dough inside the chiller overnight, you may want to reduce the yeast a little bit by like 0.1%. You're going to have to see. One thing that's going to be nice about leaving the bread overnight inside the chiller is going to give a long, slow fermentation. Okay, Diana, I see your question. I'll get to that in 1 second. Thank you. So by putting the bread in the chiller overnight, it's going to give you a long and slow fermentation. You'll actually develop a lot of flavor inside the bread. The bread's going to come out slightly more acidic because in cold temperatures, you're going to develop more acetic acid inside the bread. So if you want to do this, you take the bread you're making now, mix the dough, leave it out at room temperature. Normally in the video I say about 45 minutes or 1 hour. Leave it out at room temperature, maybe only about 20, 30 minutes. Give your folding to the bread if that bread that we have in the video has a folding, and then put directly inside the chiller. The next day, about 12 to 16 hours later, you can come back and then continue with the process like normal. But because the bread is cold, you may find that the final fermentation takes a little bit longer than we suggest inside the video. If you come the next day and the bread is really overproofed, you're going to want to try to reduce your yeast a little bit, or maybe check your chiller temperature. It may not be cold enough because a chiller we want around 4 degrees Celsius. Diana, yes, all-purpose flour you can use for making bread. Will there be effect if I use just pure rye? Yes, you use pure rye flour, your bread's going to be extremely heavy, which is not necessarily a bad thing. To talk about rye, because I happen to like rye very much, rye has gluten, so it's not good for celiac disease, but the quantity of gluten and the quality of gluten in rye is very less, okay? So you'll find a lot of very heavy breads in Northern Europe, Russia, Scandinavia, Denmark, these regions, because traditionally rye flour likes to grow in cold and wet environments. So before the globalization, these people are used to using rye flour. So you'll find you go to these countries, they have very, very heavy, very dark rye breads because using 100% rye flour. But when you're mixing with 100% rye, one thing when you're mixing, you're going to find the bread's going to look like a paste. It won't form a ball. It's going to look like a very paste, very, very sticky. And you want to bake it maybe in a loaf pan so it kind of hold the shape. If I use 100% rye and I bake the bread with the dough going inside the pan is about this big, when I finally proof it and bake it, maybe it's only this big because there's not enough gluten to trap the carbon dioxide and make the bread rise. Your bread's going to be extremely healthy, very tasty because rye has a really beautiful taste to it, but it's going to be very, very heavy because of low gluten content. So I just let you know. Most of these 100% rye breads that they're baking, they're not eating huge chunks like baguette. They cut very thin and then eat with maybe some cream cheese or smoked salmon. But a big chunk of 100% rye, you're going to feel very heavy and hard to chew. But you can make, and I very like it. When we get our advanced breads up, we're working on getting it up for you. We actually have a bread that's a very high portion of rye, just like this, and it's also going to be this kind of bread, very more heavy and dense that we slice very thin and eat like this. It's called a métail. What? Well, hold on. Meryl, I see your question. You're very, very welcome. Thank you guys for subscribing and coming to the session. I really appreciate it. What will be deck oven temperature management as compared to the convection oven? Please explain in details. Crusty bread and soft bread, baking, the temperatures and different types of baking technique. Okay, so the temperature is going to be the same. Now, when you're having an oven with a fan, if I say 230, 250, I mean 230, 250 no matter what oven we're baking in. But if you have a strong fan in your oven, you may want to reduce the heat maybe by about 15 degrees Celsius if you find the bread's taking on too much color. But whatever I tell you in the video is applicable to deck ovens as well. If you're baking a soft bread inside of a deck oven, about 200 degrees Celsius will be good for something like brioche or croissants or soft rolls. Deck oven and breads in general is going to give you probably the best oven spring and the most nice even color. I love to bake croissants and brioche in deck oven as well. Now, disclaimer for everyone, you have to check your oven. Even here in our school, we have two ovens next to each other, same brand, same company, but they bake at slightly different temperatures. So you guys are going to have to check for your oven. You're going to have to adjust because every time I go to a new place or a new country to kind of teach, I find the ovens are always different. I have to bake a batch and I have to see the kind of color. But for the crusty breads, baguettes, lean doughs, 230 to 250 depending upon your oven. For your soft breads, for the deck oven, 190 to 200. In your experience, what's the best flour used to feed your starter? Does feeding your starter with a combination of flour build, a stronger starter, or a more flavorful starter? So in our advanced bread class, we'll be using sourdough in all the breads. So we have a little bit when this comes up about sourdough for you and my personal feeding schedule for my sourdough. But I can give you a bit of information here. I just use all bread flour or all-purpose flour, preferably unbleached and unbromated. You don't want to have any kind of flour that has additives inside, like ascorbic acid or something like this. So if the bread flour is unbleached, unbromated, doesn't have additives, it's good for your sourdough. It's very simple. Now, when it comes to feeding the sourdough, every sourdough has its own personality. It's one of the really beautiful things. Your sourdough, what it does is it takes bacteria from the flour, the air, and the local bacteria in your environment. So if I have my sourdough I made in Malaysia, and I bring it to India to teach a class there, actually, at first it'll be the same. But after about a week or 2 weeks, the bacteria that's there in that flour is going to come in, and actually the community inside my sourdough is going to change. So you're going to find that I go to Philippines, I go to Indonesia, Singapore, India, that my sourdough actually takes on a little bit of a new flavor. Now, sourdough, you can feed more water or less water. Generally, the more wet the sourdough, the more lactic it's going to taste. The more stiff the sourdough, the more acidic it's going to taste. If you keep it in the chiller, it's going to be more sour. And if you proof it and feed it every day at room temperature, then it's going to be a bit more lactic. But sourdough is kind of like your baby. you're going to find that every single sourdough has a slightly different flavor. Every single sourdough is going to raise bread a little bit differently because it's just wild bacteria that you invite into a little jar and you feed it. This is really the beautiful, beautiful thing about sourdough. So for me, I use whatever kind of flour that I have available that's unbleached, unbromated. I don't add anything else to my sourdough. I don't add juice or raisins or anything else that can bring in other bacteria that maybe cause mold or bad bacteria. Just flour and water. I feed my sourdough the same amount every single day at the same exact time. And it's just like having a pet. And you continue, and then it grows with you, and then you watch it, and you kind of learn. You're going to see how it rises. If you guys excuse me for 1 second, hi Gerald, how are you? I'm just going to grab something, and maybe I can use as a little prop to explain something for you guys. Now the questions are coming up. So here you have this. This is a vase. Don't put sourdough inside here, but I just want a clear jar to give you an example. So look at your sourdough starter. You feed the sourdough, and you take like a little marker or something, and you make a mark, or you can use a rubber band, put it on here at the level where you feed it and put it back inside your jar. Now you can watch the sourdough, and generally a healthy sourdough is going to double in volume or maybe even close to triple in 6 to 8 hours. If you see that it's not doubling or tripling in 6 to 8 hours, it can't reach that, then perhaps you're going to have to check your feeding schedule. Maybe change the ratio of sourdough starter. Normally, I feed my sourdough 100% flour, 100% water, and 50% culture. But if you find that it's going too slow, you can add a little bit more of your sourdough to the flour and water. If you find after 6 to 8 hours it's rising too much and starting to collapse, either you can reduce the amount of the culture that you're using inside, or you can try to keep it at a cooler room temperature, or find the time in which it doubles and feed it at that time every day. Like I said, every sourdough is different, and when I bring my sourdough to other countries, I find, especially for some reason when I go to India and I teach, it always goes a little bit faster. So if I'm feeding my sourdough every 12 hours here in Malaysia, which I do, or once every 24 hours sometimes, if I go to India, I actually find that after 6 hours, because of maybe the flour and the temperature, I actually have to feed it again. So you just feed the sourdough, put a line. When you see it about double in volume, that's about your feeding time. Okay, hello Gerald. I hope, Wilfer, that answers your question. Sorry, I can't tell you specifically because, like I said, sourdough is really, it's person to person. You know, when I want to eat in the day and when you want to eat in the day may be a little bit different, but that's really the beauty and the fun part about sourdough. You know, learning your baby and that's yours. You know what it needs, when you want to have to feed it. You know, I give my sourdough, my sourdough has a name to it. It's Aristocles, the original name of Plato. You know, it has a name. I talk to it when I feed it. You know, sometimes I'm singing. You know, it's my baby, and I treat it like such. Sorry, I see someone say something about OTG, oven. Oh, did someone write something about oven, toaster, grill? I didn't see this kind of question. If you wrote something about this one, I see something, OTG, you reply because I can't find it. Hi, Lisa. Very nice to see you also. Was there some question about an oven, toaster, grill? Soft bread, go through pure rye flour. Can bread dough be left overnight inside the chiller? Yes, we talked about this. Is it possible wheat flour? Yeah, the all-purpose flour, like I said, yes, you can make bread with it. You just may find the oven spring is a little bit less because you don't have such strong gluten to trap the air. New comment. Okay, let's go. Oh, okay, so you just asked what OTG means. Okay. So I feel that I covered quite a few things inside the video. So if you guys don't have any more questions, like I said, we have a bread theory video up on the Facebook subscribers page. So if you watch this will follow the same exact theory that we're going to do for the basic breads, our intermediate level, and our advanced level as well. When we get to the intermediate level, we'll be using things like pre-ferments. I'll also be explaining these to you there. And then in our advanced level, we'll be using sourdough, which I'll explain a little bit more about sourdough in this one. And I'm sure, can I use milk instead of water? A certain portion, but not all. Someone asked me earlier a question about they have chocolate milk inside the bread. Milk does not only contain water, it also contains sugar and fat. If you replace all with milk, you're going to find your bread's going to be a little more heavy and doesn't have the same kind of structure. You need some water to hydrate the protein to create a good gluten content inside. So maybe if you have water, you want to replace it with milk to make the bread a little bit more softer. Try with 10%. Take about 10% of the water, replace it with milk. It won't affect your bread that much in a negative way. But you start replacing more than this, you're going to find the bread's going to start changing. So don't replace all. Good question. I just remembered. I get a lot of questions because soon we're actually coming up with an eggless topic I'll be teaching you guys. But I see, can we replace eggs inside the bread? Eggs, we do have some kind of fat inside, but generally if we have eggs, you can replace it with water or milk. For our egg washes, for like soda bread or soft roll, if you don't want to egg wash the bread, it's okay. The egg wash, you'll just find the crust is a little bit more dull color, not so shiny, it may be slightly thicker. You can also use a little bit of milk instead of eggs, or milk with a little bit of sugar, and this will help you get a little bit of color. So it's not necessary just to do the egg wash. You can just replace. Susan, please, if you look onto our Facebook subscribers group, we just uploaded a bread theory video. I actually show you how to check the bread is ready after the bulk fermentation and after the final fermentation. The reason I ask you to check this one is I don't have a dough right in front of me, but there I show you how to press the dough, what to look for. But basically on both stages, we're going to have the dough, we're going to press it with our finger, and you're going to see that it's going to bounce back a little bit and leave a slight indentation. If you press the dough gently and it bounces back really fast, it's not enough carbon dioxide trapped inside. You have to proof a little bit more. If you press the dough and your finger just stays inside, there's no kind of bounce back, then you've overproofed the bread. Overproof bread, there's a hard thing that we can do to fix it, but underproof bread, you can proof a little bit more. But if you watch this video, there's a shot and a part in there you can see very, very clearly this one. Sheetal, yes, you're very, very welcome. Rachel, hey, no problem. I'm very happy to spend this time with you guys, and I hope I can have question and answer guys for other classes in the future. I love talking about bread. I can talk all day long. Maybe you want a short answer. I can give you a very long one without even realizing it. There's no issue about this. I'm very happy to answer your question. Also, if you see on the group, I try my best to find a little bit of time every day to go on there and help you answer your questions personally. I see that you're posting. Because of course, you're watching a video online, there's always going to be some kind of questions here or there. You want a little bit of assurance when you're doing. So I try my best to go on every day and try to answer some of your questions personally the best I can. I want you guys to have the best education that you can have and make everyone be able to make really nice bread. I really like to see the people making good bread. In the croissants recipe, okay. Susan, okay, I see your question. I'll tell you in a second. In the croissants, what should be the fat percentage in the butter we use for lamination? 83% is nice. Anything above 80% fat is usually going to be okay to laminate. Below 80% fat, what happens is when the butter is cold, there's a lot of water inside, it breaks very easy. So you want about 83% is really nice or even more. However, the more fat percentage you have, the more colder you need to be because the butter gets soft very easy. If you have less than 80% fat content inside your butter, you can try adding 10% the weight of the butter in flour. So if I have a low fat content in butter, if I have 100 grams of butter for say, I can let the butter soften at room temperature naturally, take about 10 grams of flour, which is 10% the butter weight, just gently fold in and then make the butter block like I showed you. Fully baked, biggest thing to tell is by the color. You have a nice color, you're okay. When you take the bread out, it should feel light and not heavy. And when you tap the bottom, it should sound kind of hollow, like if you tap gypsum wall or drywall. When you tap this one, you'll see it's a little bit empty. I don't know if this is gypsum. Can you guys hear that? That kind of sound is what you look for actually when the bread is fully baked. I hope that answers your question, Susan. So Yeah, just take it out, tap the bottom. Should sound a little bit hollow, not like a very heavy. You'll see the color's nice, and it should feel much more lighter than it did when it went inside the oven. By cutting it open and showing the bread, that's not a sign of fully baked, because anyway, if you take it out of the oven and cut it open, one, if it's not baked, you can't put it back inside the oven anyway. So this is not a test of cutting open. Also, when we cut open the bread, depending from flour to flour and how much water you put inside, every bread will look different. So if we cut open the bread and look to see if it's done, we can't really do this because a lot of breads, depending upon the kneading technique and the proofing, they'll look different on the inside. But from the look from the outside, the feel of the bread, and if you can hear that kind of hollow sound on the bottom when you take and tap it, it'll be good to go. Because also you don't want to cut your bread when it's hot. You take the bread out of the oven and cut, all the steam's going to come and your bread's going to dry really, really fast. Okay, yes, you can restructure the overproof bread, but remember, yeast is eating sugar inside. So yeast needs sugar in order for it to live. So at a certain point, when the yeast eats too much of the sugar, it's going to start to die off. So even if it's really overproofed, it's going to develop a lot of alcohol and acidity and eat a lot of the sugar. So I shape it back and I start proofing again. I may find the second proof is not as strong. And then when I bake the bread, I have a bit more of a yeasty smell or taste. And then also the color's not so nice because too much sugar has been eaten by the yeast at that point to give a nice color on the bread. So yes, you can do. If it's a little bit overproofed, you're very welcome, Susan. Thank you for asking. If it's very, very overproofed, it's going to be hard to get a good result. A little bit, usually you can quite save it. But the later you catch it on, the more sugar's been eaten by the yeast, it's going to be much harder for you to save. Generally, in this case, what I'll do is I'll make a new bread. It's very hard to say, but yes, because it's a living thing, you have to catch it at a certain point, like this. I typed someone asked a question somewhere on the APCA subscribers, and I wrote them about some recommendations for books that you can do further reading. I'll type right here for you now while I'm waiting for some questions. There's 3 books that I highly recommend. One it's called Advanced Bread and Pastry. The author is, I may not spell it right, I'm sorry, but Michel Suez. Okay, this is a really good book all around bread and pastry inside. Not too confusing. All the recipes in this book are really solid. I used it for a long time. It was one of the first bread books I ever bought, recommended me by my bread teacher. And I met the author and he signed it and everything. It's a really, really great book. The next one I could recommend will be The Taste of Bread. The author is Raymond Calvel. This is the go-to for a lot of advanced bakers. It's a bit old school, but it tells you everything. How the flour is milled, different protein comparisons from different flours. It's really, really in-depth. It's a bit more of an advanced book, but it's really, really, really good. It's one of the go-tos. It's a very old book, and it hasn't changed in value over the many years. And another one that I happen to really like is Tartine by Chad Robertson. Really good, beautiful pictures, nice story. There's one picture in general, some guy holding a bread and just cutting. It's really nice. A lot of good advice for home bakers, and they explain this hand kneading and Dutch oven technique inside very well. How many hours is overproofed, Rachel? I'm sorry, it's hard for me to. I asked earlier in the app chef that I can proof overnight and still bake the next. Overnight inside the refrigerator, not at room temperature. Okay, because in a refrigerator, the fermentation is going to go slower because generally bacteria and fungi, they grow slower in cold temperatures. Exact amount of hours to tell you overproofed, but if you see the dough start to kind of smell yeasty and look kind of stringy like cotton candy, the bread during the bulk fermentation and final shouldn't be really, really fluffy. It shouldn't be fragile. It should have a little bit of strength to it. The best way I could tell is, somewhere on your finger. You should be able to press it and bounce back. If you kind of press this part of your finger here, you see it's kind of soft but bounce back a little bit, something like this. If you feel the bread starts smelling yeasty or really kind of stringy like cotton candy and so fragile, it's overproofed. Ours really depends upon the specific recipe, the amount of yeast inside, and the fermentation percentage. The overnight fermentation, refers to at 4 degrees Celsius in the refrigerator overnight. And in that case, you only leave it for a little time in the room and then directly to the chiller. No, you start shaping right away. Actually, dough that's cold is really more easy to shape, especially doughs that we do more wet doughs, like in the advanced bread class. When the dough is more colder, it's more easy to shape. So you start shaping right away. Actually, more easy for you to handle. Your dough was it wet before the proofing, or if it's wet afterwards? I think maybe your dough's being a little bit overproofed. If you feel the dough is wet and sticky, every flour have a different hydration. Try holding back. You're welcome, Rachel. Rachel or Raquel, I'm really sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Lisa, my dough becomes wet at times, and after proofing it's difficult to work with. Try reducing the water content inside. Some different flours, they have different water absorption. So if I use a certain amount of water in my bread here, and your dough feels really wet, doesn't look the same like my video, try taking out, maybe start with like 2% of the water, just reduce at first, and then you can try, because every flour has a different absorption rate. Especially even if the flour's been sitting in a humid environment for a long period of time, it'll start taking some water from the air, and then you won't be able to add so much water inside. These are the small little things that I said that really are very unique situations that we have to tech. Oh, okay. I'm very glad I pronounce it right. And thank you very much. I see you on Facebook a lot, and I appreciate you following and joining the class. Any other questions? Otherwise, I think we'll start wrapping it up for today. And like I said, I'm also with you guys. I try my best, like I said, to take some time out and answer your questions every day on the group. If you ask a question on the Facebook group and it doesn't get answered right away, just give us a little bit of time. I'm there, Chef Tan is there, and also our administrators are there as well. We try to get your questions the best we can. Okay. If there's one more, okay. I'll take a few more questions. If possible, please guide us on devices used for baking. What do you mean devices? If you're talking about tools and things, if you watch the theory video, we just upload it. I go pretty in depth on all the tools I'm using in the video, as well as the different types of ovens. Lisa, no problem. It's again. Let's go back. Someone just said, Shita, please watch the theory videos. I think you're asking about questions and ovens. At that point, if you still have some kind of question, you can post on that video there, and I'll try to get back. Yeah, Shita, the equipment is all there in that video. I go through each one by one and then show you. So just have a look at that, and that should answer a lot of questions for you guys. And then put some questions there if you have. So anyways, guys, thank you very much. You're all very, very welcome. I'm really glad to hear from you guys. Sometimes something like pastry or bread, that's usually like a hands-on thing. Learning online may seem a bit more daunting and difficult, but don't be afraid. Don't be shy. It took me a long time also to get where I'm at, and even as sometimes I'm still learning. The best thing that I can give advice for you guys is just keep on baking. But when you're baking, watch what you're doing. Take down the steps and write it down. This way, later, when you have a result, if it doesn't come out okay, you can go back and you can see, what did I do? Maybe I can go back and I can see. And little by little, you guys will get it. I promise, just like anything, you take enough time and you practice, you'll get there. I tell you from my own personal experience, when I was in school and I learned, I'm sure my teachers want to knock me on the head, but it gets better. Just keep going. And you guys have a really good. Okay, I'll answer this one last question. Susan, any alternatives to lamb? Very simple. You take the same kind of blade I use on the lamb. You can buy a safety razor blade. For like the shaving. The old-fashioned one. They have the blade. You take this blade. You can cut with this. It's a bit dangerous to hold by your hand. So what you can do is you can take a satay stick and kind of put it through the satay stick hole. You have a lamb. Or a crab fork. You know, you go to the dollar store or Daiso, buy the crab fork like this one. I find these actually have a nice curve, and you can put the blade on there as well. Okay, guys, I guess guys and ladies, I'll end here for the day. I hope you guys all have a really good weekend as well, and thank you for taking some time out on your Saturday and being here with me. So, like I say in all the videos, I hope you guys have some happy baking and stick with it, and we're here for you for as best we can through every step of the process. And same like you guys are learning, also bear with us a little bit. You know, we're just getting this online program up, so we try our best for you as well, and any kind of issues, we're always here for you. So thank you very much, and I think we'll finish for the day. And like I said, I'll be on the chat again. I'll try to find you guys and help you with your questions. So thank you guys, have a good weekend, and happy baking.